Welcome to this video. This is not going to be it's not going to be a short, fleeting video. This is going to be pretty solid. In fact, it may even turn out to be a series of videos that is going to be quite in depth. This is going to be something for people who want something a little bit more solid, a bit more advanced, and we're going to get into the subject of objective morality. Now, in some sense, this is actually going to be a sort of a video that could accompany the part two or video number two of my series that I'm about to put out separately on the test for a legitimate constitution. And part two is going to be a summarized version of this video, if you like. So in other words, this video is going to be a sort of an extra study, if you like, and it's going to turn out to be probably about an hour and a half of material, maybe, and I may well divide it up into multiple videos, but we'll see how we go. But we are going to get into some quite in-depth stuff, which is good, because a number of questions have come up recently where people have been asking along the lines of, well, how do we have a legitimate rule of law or constitution when we all don't necessarily have a shared morality? And what I'm coming to suggest in this video, and I have in all my material generally, is that no, you can't do that. That morality, you have to come to recognize ultimately that morality has an objective nature to it. And that's what this video is really about. It's starting to look into some of these deeper questions and understand why that is, how do we come to recognize that? So let's get into it. So I've got some notes here, and we've got quite a few pages of notes. So it's going to take a while to get through this stuff, but let's do it. Let's get straight into it. So our morality or our ethics, if you like, our value system. And what is that? It's the foundational principles or our values that determine what we might consider to be right or wrong behavior. That's really what we're talking about, is because these are the questions that come up, is who decides what's right and wrong behavior? Yeah, so there has to be some kind of test for that. And some people are saying, of course, that test is different in everybody. Yeah, and that, of course, brings about moral relativism, which is a problem, because if we're all acting morally relative, then nobody agrees on what is just and what is not just. So that's what we're getting into. So the judgment of wrongdoing is absolutely key when we're worrying about freedom and liberty, essentially. Yeah, and why is that? Well, it's because it's all about our choices. Yeah, what you can safely decide to do without being prevented by the threat of punishment from common justice. Yeah, what are the boundaries to behavior that's acceptable? That's essentially what we're saying. So what is our common justice in our society? What is it based on? And how do we judge what is just and what is not just? And that is what I'm saying is our value system. And obviously there have been philosophers all through history that have looked into this, moral philosophers, and I interestingly have I didn't really go into philosophy until afterwards, but I came to these questions first and sort of worked them through in my own way, also with the study of natural law and the more esoteric study of natural law. And I got that bit first, and then I went back to the philosophers and started to look at them. And I've been looking at one or two in particular, actually, and they'll come up in this. So we've got Frederick Bastiat, the law, and he was an individualist, absolutely spot on, and explains how it has to work like that very well, although he didn't have a solution, interestingly. And I'll get into that a little bit later. And I've also been reading Immanuel Kant, Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, which is not lightweight, but it's interesting how some of these philosophers have come to this understanding, in my view, at least anyway, and maybe I'm missing something, I don't know. In my view, they've come to it in a rather overcomplicated way, because actually, if you study the esoteric study of natural law, you arrive at this understanding actually quite quickly and quite much more rapidly, much more straightforwardly, I think. But we'll get into that a little bit as well. So yes, I've been looking at conventional philosophy as well, and putting those things together. Now, so how can we come to know that value system? How do we come to know that the value system that we all share and all recognize? How can we come to know that? and recognize it and decide whether even that is legitimate. Yeah. So if we can come to an arrangement on understanding that yes, there is a certain, or there are certain principles under our shared value system that we can all come to recognize, then that's got to be a good thing. And in fact, we have to do that. Otherwise, we can't have a rule of law, essentially. Yeah, because some people think that one's values can be relative or made up as we go through life, as I just said. Some believe that our values come from our culture and our heritage, and that's true to a certain extent too. And so this is what we're going to go into. So why, just to recap on that, why does it matter? Well, our morality or our values affect how we interact with others. Yeah, and to a greater or lesser extent, we exhibit compassion, forgiveness, loyalty, cooperation, reciprocity, whether a reciprocal kind of arrangement between us. Yeah, and the degree to which we exhibit those things leads to the degree to which we flourish in our community. Right? And these are the sorts of hints that I'm going to be getting into. Our value system and our morality must be based on something that is recognized by all if we're going to have a shared justice system. I've already said that. Investigating what value system lies at the foundation of the English law system in particular, because that's what I deal with and that's what I'm looking at and that's what I'm trying to demonstrate is legitimate in this series. So what is at the foundation of the English law system in particular? Is it recognizable by all equally? Yeah, or does that value system require one to rest on a particular religion or faith? Yeah, these are important issues, right? I don't think your faith and religion is enough. I'm not saying it's not needed, but you need to understand the mysteries. You need to understand it through the perspective of natural law. Because if you don't have that grounded framework of seeing morality as an objective truth in the universe. You don't receive that wisdom just through teachings of man passed down, even if you do claim it's God's word. You have to see it as an inevitable. If we can find something that we can all see that might demonstrate to us what is moral, then we can have a shared sense of morality without having to claim a religion or some particular ideology. If we can find these clues and signs within reality itself around us, then we could come to recognize that morality is not relative. Yeah, you can't make it up individually and just adhere to certain principles when you feel like it and not at other times. Yeah. How can society be harmonious whilst simultaneously be based on moral relativism? Yeah, and this is exactly what I'm getting to. And it's fundamentally what, a number of philosophers, but in particular Immanuel Kant, in that work was trying to get to. He was trying to say, look, regardless of our senses, what we call empirical philosophy or empirical morality, which is how we feel about things. And to a certain extent, we have to do that too. He was describing that as the sort of normal ethics or the way of coming to morality. But what he was saying is that can we break this down into pure logic and reason? Can we come to know our value system absolutely through sort of self-evident logic? Yeah, and that's what he was basically saying in that work is what he was coming to. And it's very interesting. But it feels to me a little bit cumbersome, the route that he took, compared with just the study of occult natural law, if you like, or esoteric natural law. Moral relativism would come from a morality or value system more likely to be formed when you rely upon empiricism or external sense, a specific faith or religion, or purely on an analysis of feeling. Okay, so but that's still important, and we still need that, as in fact he said. Yeah, what we really need is a moral philosophy that is based on a combination of types of reasoning, but especially pure deductive reasoning that is not founded upon external sense but pure logic. Things that can be expressed self-evidently, sometimes in philosophy known as a priori knowledge, which is a phrase that's used in moral ethics and the philosophy of ethics. So in other words, what he was saying, a metaphysical morality, essentially. Immanuel Kant came to this realization that this was needed and embarked on this project, and it was quite a serious project. So just a quick quotation from him, page 30 of that particular, this is the James Ellington edition, the translation of Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals. Hence, there is only one categorical imperative. That was the thing that he has become known for, the categorical imperative. And it is this: act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So what he's saying, and that's a slightly sort of more elaborate way, I think, of saying the golden rule, essentially, which is that if you can come up with a maxim, if you can then, the test is basically, if you were to wish that to be universal, that everybody applies that universal rule that you've just come up with, that maxim, how would things work out? That's essentially what he's saying, is that it's a universality. That's his argument, essentially. So we'll get into that a little bit more as we proceed through this. So, recognition of a shared morality. So in the ability to recognize a shared morality in something properly reasoned, but especially including self-evidential knowledge, we can then have an equitable system. Okay, and so if we just remind ourselves about what equity means, equity is brought about by the very fact that we can all recognize that shared value system. Yeah, it's equitable because it doesn't favor any one of us. Yeah, it means equity is that we're all under the same set of standards, that we start from the position that we're all treated equally under the law. Yeah, and that's that's a prerequisite for me. I don't. As soon as you don't accept equity as your base foundational standard, then what you're essentially saying is that no, I'm happy to live in a society where some people can decide all the laws for me, and therefore gain power over me. And we'll get into that, but it's self-evidently that is not a place that we want to go. I would think. I think most would agree with that. But what is really interesting is when we start to get into the nature of man, because by examining the nature of man, that's when we start to dig up clues as to the natural order and how we ourselves have been created, which will then give us clues as to the best ethics, the best ethical system, the what our morality really should look like for our own betterment. Yeah, that's what I'm saying in this section. So in order to recognize the signs of a morality, we need to look at the nature of man himself. That's what I've just said. Man's nature itself gives us clues as to how man best functions. And this takes us into concepts like the ownership of his own life, self-ownership. And I would say that's most unquestionably the case, that man is designed fundamentally to own himself and own his own faculties. How can we recognize that? Again, because man is born with capabilities and faculties that allow him to function. He has self-determination because of those. He can make choices that will be good for himself. He can put in effort and do work. And if you think about what that is, well, that's the production of property. Yeah, property is the product of time, effort, and work. It's the exercising of those faculties that he was born with, essentially. Yeah. And what is that in a different context? You could say, well, that is exercising free will. Yeah, exercising your free will is the use of your faculties that you were born with, right? So there's a connection there between what you're born with in the way of your capabilities and your skills and your values in that sense. All humans are born with the equal need to follow their choices. If you see what I mean by that, right? Every human is born with the need to be able to exercise those choices and those faculties. The faculties that we put it a different way, the faculties that we possess, and let's list some of those, yeah, such as intelligence, common sense, presence of mind, you could say, initiative, all of these things. Yeah, they allow us to make choices and better ourselves and our condition. Are there any limits to us exercising our free will and making those choices that are best for us by using those faculties? Yeah, and that's obviously going to be the next question that we come to. Yeah. I should say, by the way, at this point that, I mean, I spent quite a lot of time thinking about these things, partly because I have to demonstrate the conclusions that I've come to about constitutional law and the rule of law. And it's all relating to things like, the study of natural law. And so I've spent years looking at these things, and I might have missed some things. Yeah, and so if any of you guys are listening to this and having had a really good think about it and have listened to the whole video and made the effort, in other words, don't just come back to me. I'm basically saying, look, do come back to me if you want to discuss any of these things. If you want to get in contact, that's absolutely fine. But don't do it through some kind of, you're a bit triggered by something that I've said within the first 10, 15 minutes of the video. Watch the whole video, think about all the things that I'm saying, mull it over a bit, give it some time, and then come back to me. And I'm very happy to discuss any of these things. I'm up for it, definitely, always. I find this kind of stuff fascinating. And it's essential, it's really important as well, particularly now with what's going on. Now, let's get into equity a little bit further. So, exercising our free will can result in benefit or chaos to ourselves. It's not necessarily one or the other, right? Because what we do in exercising our free will is we make decisions and we take actions. The point at which problems begin to emerge is when we exercise that free will in such a way as to either bring chaos on ourselves because we haven't assimilated all the information that's necessary for us to make good decisions for ourselves. Or in the case of a moral decision, we exercise that free will in such a way as to begin preventing someone else from exercising their choices. Yeah, and that's the immediate hint at what equity is all about. Equity is this idea that we all need to be left to make our own choices and to exercise our free will and our faculties equally. Yeah, because we're all born with them. Yeah, so there's clearly an intention there, right, in the natural order that we all must have that ability to be able to exercise those faculties. So there are certain conditions that are built into the universe. So if you act in a way that is trampling over other people's free will, their rights, their fundamental rights, you're going to get negative consequence coming back to you automatically, regardless of whether there's a man-made court system in place. Nothing to do with that. Okay, it's not going to go well for you. In some way, through the rearrangement of complex dynamics in the universe, all kinds of stuff is going to come back to you. Bad stuff. And we know that's true. So there are naturally existing boundaries to our free will. It's already built in. And that thing is equity, because it's the natural rights of others provides the limitation on your own rights. To retain a condition of harmony, we must learn to make choices for ourselves such that we don't prevent someone else from exercising theirs. Yeah, and what this is a condition of reciprocity. It's reciprocal. It's a reciprocal arrangement. Yeah, I can't very well expect others to regard my free will choices if I don't recognize that same freedom for others. So in that relationship and in that arrangement, you could say that everyone is being held to the same standards naturally, right? It's a naturally emerging arrangement there. The natural limit on our free will is where exercising it will prevent another from exercising theirs. The naturally existing limit on free will is another's free will. Yeah, just the very existence of other people around us exercising their free will is, if you like, the boundary that naturally exists there. Yeah, it's not that anyone's imposed it artificially. Yeah, it's not a policing exercise in that regard. It's a naturally existing boundary or line. I can't make my choices in a way that takes away someone else's choices. That leads to the detriment of the other. So an example of that might be, building a woodshed or even a small extension on your house might not upset your neighbour in any way, but setting up a tyre burning business might. I've used that example before. Yeah, Problems emerge when we can't be sensible and reasonable with our neighbour. Yeah, and so to begin with, this is about negotiation in the first instance. It's about sorting out our differences. Yeah, that's how somebody behaves who is calm, solid, and in control of their lives. Somebody who's acting as a sovereign, if you like, you could say, um, does that. They negotiate. They understand how to deal with it with disagreements and matters in a kind of grown-up way. Yeah, that's what we're really saying. If your governing framework itself doesn't require equity, then you are building in inequity, essentially. Inequity is the existence of a tilting of the playing field to advantage some over others in matters of justice. Yeah, it's not about about providing for people or entitlement. That's a different thing, and we'll get into that as collectivist. So that causes some to have a power differential over others if you've got a tilted playing field. And that in turn leads to a condition of slavery. Because ultimately, if some people have a power differential over others, like being able to decide the law of your community, that is not based on equitable naturally existing principles, then in effect, it leads to the temptation of people with that greater power to then exercise it and then to gain power over other people. And we know where that goes. Yeah. Slavery is a condition in which the slaves have had their ability to make choices either curtailed, limited, or removed. Yeah, that's an absolutely key point, isn't it, there? Now, I've got another quotation here from Immanuel Kant. Here we are. So he says here, fourth, right, because it's a list of other things, but I've just taken this bit out. This is page 37 in the grounding of the metaphysics of morals. Fourth, concerning meritorious duty to others. The natural end that all men have is their own happiness. Now, humanity might indeed subsist if nobody contributed anything to the happiness of others, provided he did not intentionally impair their happiness. But then he's saying that's not enough. So the next bit is, but this, after all, would harmonize only negatively and not positively with humanity as an end in itself. If everyone does not also strive, as much as he can, to further the ends of others, for the ends of any subject, who is an end in himself, must, as far as possible, be my ends also, if that conception of an end in itself is to have its full effect in me. Immanuel Kant, Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals. So what he's doing there in a rather 19th century language is he's explaining the golden rule, essentially. But he's also hinting at the connectedness of individuals there. Kant is expressing the golden rule effectively, what we learn from the occult study of natural law anyway. And I would say actually that the occult study of natural law is easier. It's an easier route. Yeah, and you could say actually here that conventional and mainstream philosophy is arriving here gently, gradually, at the same conclusions that the study of natural law got to centuries, if not thousands of years before. Yeah, and this is what I've meant by the study of natural law being hidden and being occulted. Yeah, because here we are with Immanuel Kant in what is really mainstream. It's just the conventional world. And yet the philosophers in this open public arena of philosophy, he's only just getting there with their reason. Whereas actually the study of, particularly the occult study of natural law, it got us there like millennia ago. Yeah, and this was the mystery traditions, and I'm going to get into this in a later section on what natural law is, and we get into the study of natural law a little bit more and what that is. But this is what I'm saying is that this recognition of the golden rule or the principle of my rights end where another's begin is quite occulted. Although we kind of throw it off there as if it's like an acceptable thing. And it's certainly at the heart of the Christian faith as well. And if you go into the other religions, I would say that to a great extent, it sits at the bottom there, I think, as well. Um, but it's kind of its clarity is hidden. It's not quite explained in the way that I think it needs to be. You don't get the same clarity that you do through the study of natural law, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, this next section is about recognizing boundaries, because there are some problems emerging here, aren't there? Self-evidently, there are problems in our community and our society. Yeah. Why is there crime, contention, and dispute? Yeah, because recognizing those boundaries or limits to our own free will is difficult. Yeah, and we're going to look at why that is. There are problems. Yeah, why do we have such a problem in seeing the truth behind those transgressions? Yeah, it's not just about seeing the truth behind our independent decisions, not with other people. They're not really moral questions about how we're dealing with other people necessarily. It could be just the steps and the actions that we take in life generally. We're making big mistakes that then we get problems coming back from it, because why is it? Because we're not seeing or perceiving the truth behind the situation properly before we take that action. Yeah, but it's the same in a moral transgression as well. It's the same thing, not being able to see that truth. A crime in natural law is that stepping over that line to prevent another exercising their choices. And we'll get into clarifying that a little bit more. Committing a crime is in some way a denial of truth, not being able to see truth properly, not correctly observing the truth behind a situation, or actively denying it even, or the truth behind it. Or even it's slightly even more than that, knowing the truth completely, absolutely, but still deciding to act contrary to it as well. Yeah, there are different sort of degrees of not seeing the truth. You know what I'm saying? And we'll get into that more. Okay, so here we go. This is the section on natural law itself. So by studying our reality around us in relation to cause and effect and consequences of our behaviors, you can come to recognize that there are some self-evident truths that emerge. So in the same way that there are concepts in mathematics, for example, that can be seen in the natural world around us. You can see plenty of natural world behind me. It is the same with our behavior patterns in humans as well. So the way that we behave, the way we react in situations to the information that we gather and the actions that we then decide to take ultimately, there are patterns to that. And that's what the study of natural law is. Now, if you look at the physical world, the laws of nature itself, which is a different thing from natural law. Natural law is much more esoteric. But the laws of nature, a lot of people make that mistake of thinking that we're talking about the same thing. Natural law, oh, that's just the laws of nature. No, it's not. Yeah, natural law is much more occulted. It's a much more occulted study, a hidden study, and much more esoteric. Esoteric meaning it's harder to access. Much more. It's not an everyday knowledge. Yeah, it's a deeper knowledge that sometimes you have to be initiated into. Now, back to the laws of nature. Now, I was looking the other day at the sort of fractal nature of reality, because we can gain a lot of insight into the sort of brilliance and the complexity of repeated patterns that we see endlessly, visual patterns that you see repeatedly at different scales within nature itself. And you can, in the same way that you can see sort of geometric patterns within the natural world, within nature, you can also see complex patterns that relate to our consequences, the consequences of our actions as well. And that is where, and so as above, so below. You can see that in our own individual lives, if you like, you can see that there are reflections and patterns in the big things as well. And this is to do with the principle of correspondence in Hermeticism. As above, so below. As without, so within, and in reverse. Yeah. So I was hinting at sacred geometry there, which is this sort of geometric things and the shapes that we see in nature. The nature of the divine in the physical pattern and shapes in nature, expressed in sort of special proportions, ratios, and patterns. Yeah, so we see that in the Fibonacci series and all these amazing proportions and ratios that we see in mathematics. It's recognizable, yeah, in the patterns that we see in leaves, in branches of trees, in the snowflakes that we see coming down, um, flower petals, rock formations, crystals, water in particular, really interesting study, and in the shape of lightning, for example, as well. And this has been talked about a lot by many scientists. So the way that you can see the proportions in these patterns, but in the same way, you can see it in non-visual concepts as well, and how they sort of relate in the same way to physical patterns through the same sort of ratios and patterns. You see it in musical scales and harmonics, for example, and even the things like the scales and the modes. And if you're a musician, you'll understand what I talk when I'm talking about modes, for example, and the intervals. All of that is connected with a kind of numerology, a complex numbering system, which you can see and you can recognize the patterns in this stuff. It's absolutely astounding. They relate to sort of number systems in the physicality of nature as well. The same kind of number systems are used. And I remember back in the 1980s, I think it was Mandelbrot, Benoit Mandelbrot, who was a mathematician, using a computer, plotting complex iterated patterns based on the proportions that are found in nature. For the first time, he was able to use computers to take the mathematical numbers formula and proportions and plot those into computer programs that then generates these iterated repeated patterns exactly like you see, as I say, in leaves, in lightning, in whatever it is. Absolutely astounding. And so why am I going into this? What the hell's Will talking about? I'm going into it because I'm demonstrating the astounding patterns that you see, all the structures, the clever structures and the relationships and the proportions that you see built into nature. But what I'm saying is that you see it built in not only into the physical, the visual, and the material, but you see it based in how those same patterns can relate to truth and morality and the decisions that we take and the actions that we take as well. You can see similar kinds of repeated patterns that develop in not only in our individual lives, but in the collective as well. So the graph of enlightenment. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Low consciousness, in other words, you're acting immorally and sort of unaware. Awakening, enlightenment, slavery, rigidity, latitude, and freedom. Look at the graph. Look at how that works. That's a dynamic of reality of the universe. And we haven't got time to go into those in too much detail, but some of this is going to start emerging. You're going to see that as we get into this stuff. So what I'm really saying is that we have a kind of a complex machine of reality here going on. And it's a little bit like, so our actions that we take and the decisions that we take create, they're triggers, right? They create sort of like micro ripples in the pond of life, if you like. So if you think about, throwing a stone into a pond and you get the rippling effect going out, the circles going out, that's what's happening. Yeah, that's how our natural order is set up and how we, as human beings, are having effects within the natural order. Yeah, so natural law, it really is the study of, or the study of natural law, I should say, is the study of consequences in the universe, how events unfold, and the nature of man and his psyche, and how that interacts with the world around us, with the bigger things. Yeah, and I should just clarify that the big things in the universe, the study of the big things is considered what is known as the major arcana, and the study of the micro things, and that would include ourselves as individuals, that would be called the minor arcana in these ancient mystery traditions. So this is all about the interactions of man with his reality and with other human beings. It's how that works. What are the patterns that develop? It's about cause and effect, and it's about this complex system that we live in, that we inherit, that we inhabit. I like to think of natural law sometimes as a complex system. But that's a bit patronizing, because a complex system, a little bit like a man-made system, like that. Okay, so that's a electronics diagram, a circuit diagram. If you're particularly interested, it's for a power supply unit. Anyone done any electronics here? Okay, fantastic. Right, so you'll notice there are all sorts of components in here. We've got some diodes, we've got some transistors, you'll have some capacitors and things in there as well. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that you are one of those, right? You're a component in life. And you can see here how you've got sort of feedback loops going on. So if you as a component in this circuit are working correctly, functioning in the way that the universe wanted you to function, in the way that you're designed, then the circuit's going to work okay, right? One of the things that you might not know is that, if we take a resistor, for example, resistors have what are called tolerance value on them. If you buy a decent quality resistor, I think it's ages since I've done any electronics, but it's a 5% tolerance. That means that resistor works with 95% accuracy, and there's a 5% possibility that it could go out by that much. So resistors are measured in ohms. That's the amount it stops the current coming through the circuit. That's what a resistor's for. Yeah, and 5% tolerance would be that's its inaccuracy potential. Yeah, but if a component breaks down, that tolerance level will get wider, and all sorts of things start to happen. Okay, you start to get feedback loops. You start to get a rise in current where there shouldn't be, or a rise in voltage level, or whatever it is. And if that component breaks down, what happens? All sorts of other components around it in the circuit break down as well. It's exactly what happened to us, wasn't it, the other day? We had an old TV that wasn't working. It was actually the power supply unit as well. And one component blew, and a whole load of other components were bust in that. And so you just had to replace the whole board at that situation. So it's quite a good demonstration of the sort of effects of us within our environment and within the world. Yeah. But it is quite an important way of describing the natural order like that, is that we have those cause and effect and consequences on ourselves, but also everybody else around us as well. It's a science, this. Yeah, this is not a religion, it's not a faith, it's a science. This is all about unfolding or rearrangement of microdynamics in reality based on your actions. Yeah, natural law itself has always existed. It's the operating conditions of the universe or the natural order. The study of natural law has a very long history as well. Natural law has always existed, obviously, yeah. But the study of natural law is something that you can decide that you can engage in or not, right? What you can't decide to do, what's not your choice, is whether you take part in natural law, right? Natural law has, just like the law of gravity or the laws of thermodynamics or any of these other things, they're operating on you whether you like it or not. You don't get a choice in whether you take part in the effects of natural law. Okay, they've always existed, they've always been there, and they're operating on you regardless of whether you believe in it, whether you regard it in any way, you want to ignore it. Yeah, you can ignore natural law, but it's still going to be affecting you. That's the point, yeah? I've sometimes been a little bit unclear on that. What I'm really saying is that you can ignore its effects if you want to, but that's a dangerous thing to do, because if you're not paying attention to the fact that natural law is still operating on you regardless, then you're going to be just taking decisions with no understanding or knowledge of the fact that this is still going on regardless, right? And so that's a really bad thing to do. So what I'm saying is that the study of natural law, which has a very long history, by the way, is actually a prerequisite. Natural law requires us itself to actually study itself, because if you don't, what are you going to get? You're going to get bad consequences. You're going to get negative karmic consequences back. And that's what karma is, in a way. It's just that. It's just the bad consequences that come back to you because you're not observing truth. That's what it is. That's all it is, right? I'm getting muddled up with my pages. Where are we? Oh, yeah, here. Now, the study of natural law has got a history of where we've been dissuaded from looking at it. The broad mass of the population are generally dissuaded from looking at natural law. That's why it's part of the occult body of knowledge. Yeah, it's right. So those in you could say influential people in societies generally would, I've written this down actually, would generally prefer, and have done so in the past, in past history, they have preferred people not to be aware of the deep study of natural law, and hence it is considered part of the occult body of knowledge. Okay, and so not well-meaning people don't want you to look at natural law, firstly, because in coming to understand natural law, you take the first steps to understand how the universe fundamentally operates. And therefore, it's going to have the biggest impact positively on the decisions that you take and the actions that you take, because it affects your morality, it affects the whole way in which you conduct yourself. Now, the mystery schools, which were all about the teaching of natural law, also at times hid the study of natural law as well, partly for their own safety, because they had to keep it underground during dangerous times, maybe. But they also dissuaded or held it back sometimes as well, for people, particularly for people who aren't ready to hear the truths that emerge from the study of natural law. Yeah, it was taught by the mystery schools, but only to those who were considered ready to hear it. Yeah, you had to be initiated into those schools. So why was that? Well, it's because of distortion, because there's a tendency of those who are not ready to receive and understand the truths that emerge from natural law to distort the messages that inevitably emerge, right? So why, again, why is that? Well, it's because it's uncomfortable. Because those that are not ready to receive these difficult messages and the truths that one comes to know from the study of natural law are generally uncomfortable, because it sheds light on the nature of the self and our relationship to truth. Yeah, and this is where it starts to get uncomfortable, where people don't like. I mean, you could say in a way that, natural law has a kind of dissuasion effect built into it anyway. We have to overcome. We have to become bold and brave to face the truths of natural law. And so it's not as if, the powers that be, if you like, those that are influential and powerful in society are going to have a particularly hard time in dissuading you from looking at natural law, because there is already within it itself a kind of built-in dissuasion mechanism, because, it's hard going. Yeah, it's hard going not only because it's relatively complex in some ways. There's some complex concepts to come to understand and recognize. But more importantly, it's uncomfortable as well, because it starts to cause us to have to go into a kind of self-reflective mode, an introspective mode, if you like. It's about shadow work, guys. That's what it is. It takes you into required shadow work and introspective work. So I've got a section here about controllers who have this tendency to want to hide it anyway. But those who like to manage society make decisions about how society must function. Yeah, those are what I call collectivists. People who like to fix everybody else's problems. People who like to kind of map out and control and plan for everybody else. Right, that's a collectivist. People who do that would rather you didn't look at this information about natural law, precisely because through the study of it, you can begin to see how making decisions for everybody else, like they do, collectivists, does not align with the way the natural order operates. In other words, what emerges really clearly from the study of natural law is that some people taking ownership of everybody else's decisions is not the natural way that it's not the way that the natural order wants to work and wants to function. Yeah, so in other words, what's naturally emerging from this is their illegitimacy of their behavior in determining other people's lives and how they function and how they operate, making decisions for them, planning for them. Yeah, this is exactly what I'm saying. So in other words, natural law itself is already teaching us, just from the things that we've already looked at, that the golden rule, which is to leave everybody else to their own choices, is a prerequisite and it's a requirement. It absolutely, the natural order requires that condition. And if you don't do it, if you don't implement that both in your own life and in the collective, you're going to get negative karmic consequence. The electronic circuit's going to go crazy. All the components are going to break down. You're going to get voltage levels going wild. This is my point, right? Is that the study of natural law absolutely brings to the surface itself the fact that behaving like a collectivist and denying people choices is not good. It's going to bring about bad stuff in your society, and all kinds of negative karmic consequence. So what is the study of natural law ultimately taking us to? Because we're really barely scratching the surface here. This is, we're not getting into natural law in any significant way, but I am, in this whole set of videos, I am bringing to the surface, if you like, hints and clues as to what natural law is teaching us. Yeah. More than hints and clues, I think. So this is about discovery, not invention. Yeah, it's about discovery of what's there naturally, not inventing something for ourselves in the way of morality. This is not about inventing conditions, values, morality for ourselves. It's about learning to align with what exists and what is required. It's a recognition of God's laws. Yeah, and you'll see more as we get into this how that is the case, and you can't argue against it. It's an inevitability. Yeah. Okay, so this next section is we looked at natural law, and I've described what the natural order is, natural laws, what the natural laws are. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go along, but this section, cause and effect, is going to take us into it a little bit more anyway. So it's about consequences. Decisions that we make and the actions that we take will lead to consequences. There's the indication right there that this is about a science. It's about the complex machine or the complex system that I was talking about earlier. What we are hinting at here is the existence of dynamics that can come to be recognized from the study of cause and effect, which is the study of natural law. Natural law is a science, not a faith or religion. I've said that. Its effects are still operating on you regardless of your belief in it. So that made me think of the films Back to the Future, and where great films. I love those films. Where Marty McFly and the Doc went back in time, at least in the first one, and they had to be really careful about engaging with their other version of themselves in the past, and engaging with other people and their family members as they were sort of 40 years before or whatever it was. They had to be really careful and not to mess up any events that were unfolding, because obviously that would potentially jeopardize their own existence back in the future again. Yeah, back to the future. That was what it was all about, right? So they had to be careful. Yeah, it was all, that's what the whole series was in a way was about, essentially. But it's a little bit like that. It's the cause and effect, if you like. By looking closely at the resulting effects of certain actions of men, we can begin to recognize that certain types of action result in the delivery of negative consequences for the action taker and those around him, because we are working in opposition to the way the natural order wishes to function. Yeah, or to truth, if you like. We're bringing about a kind of false truth by denying certain things in our decision making. That's what's effectively happening. Conversely, you could say that certain actions and decisions lead to positive conditions in our lives and promote a harmonious interaction with others, because we are working in alignment with the ways the universe wishes to function. And really what that is aligning with truth, with the way things really are, not denying things. Some actions are good for us, others are not. So in short, we can come to recognize that the actions that are bad for us are those that in some way, maybe a small way to begin with, are transgressing on the choices of someone else. And the question that comes up at the end of this section simply is, why do we get this kind of stuff wrong? Yeah, because we do quite a lot. And this is what I'm going to go into now. The next few sections of this are going to get a little bit dark because they're going to get into the true nature of man. And in a way, it's very positive at the end, and you'll see why. Why it gets really positive at the end. But to begin with, as we go through these next few sections, you'll start to see why it absolutely is necessary that we need an education on this. And I had somebody quite recently saying, very sarcastically saying, "Oh, we don't need an education. It's all quite simple, Will. Natural law is quite simple." No, it isn't actually. It is quite difficult, and we do need an education. And you will see absolutely precisely why that is in the next few sections. And we'll see as we get into it. You'll see what I mean.